The first day of preseason testing at Bahrain is over, and that is it. Within a blink of an eye, a third of the total amount of time that each of the teams are going to have is over. It really does come thick and fast in 2023. There is not a lot of time for these teams to prepare, so let's get into all of the highlights from day one. First of all, let's get into the lap times that each of the drivers did, and also the total amount of laps that each of the teams did as well. Now, I have got these times courtesy of the race because they also tell you the tyre that each of the drivers were on as well, and also the amount of laps that each of the individual drivers did as well. Now, it was a very familiar name at the top of the timesheets, with Max Verstappen setting a time of 1 minute 32.837 on the C3 tyre and doing a total of 157 laps, and Red Bull were the only team where Max Verstappen actually did the entire day by himself. So usually teams split it between two drivers, so one driver does the morning session and the other driver does the afternoon, but Red Bull were the only ones that let Max do the entire day, and then it will be Checo doing the entire day on day 2. So yeah, I mean, what can you say? The quickest time for Red Bull and also the most amount of laps, 157. So yeah, I am sure Max is definitely going to be feeling it tomorrow on his neck. Now, if you're wondering how that compares to the end of day 1 in 2022, the quickest time at the end of day 1 was actually set by Pierre Gasly with a time of 1 minute 33.902. So Max is over 1 second quicker compared to the fastest time at the end of day 1 last year. So yeah, we thought that these cars might be getting a little bit slower, but absolutely none of it, which is actually really good to see. It just shows the development that the teams are doing to these cars, which is fantastic. But yeah, I think it was Fernando Alonso, however, in second place. That was the really big and happy surprise. So yeah, despite a rough start for Aston Martin at the beginning of the day, it did end on a high, I think, and both of the Ferraris also looking very strong, with Carlos Sainz in 3rd and Charles Leclerc in 4th. Although it is very difficult to kind of gauge the performance at the moment, it does look good for Ferrari. I mean, both of their drivers kind of operating at a similar level on the same tyres, doing a decent amount of laps as well. So yeah, not too bad by them. Lando Norris completed the top 5 with a time of 1 minute 33.462, but I don't think it was the best of days for McLaren, to be honest. Completing the top 10 is Alex Albon, although he did do his time on the C5 tyre. So yeah, the Williams looking a little bit better than I think perhaps it actually is. And the rest of the top 10 was completed by Zhou, Russell in the Mercedes, and then Logan Sargent in the other Williams as well. Unfortunately, none of the Haas drivers were in the top 10, although it is a returning Nico Hülkenberg who actually had a little bit of his car fall off when he was riding the curbs early in the session. So yeah, it doesn't look like the best of days for Haas, although yeah, they didn't do the most amount of mileage, but hopefully a little bit more will come on day 2. Completing the top 20 was Valtteri Bottas, and then Nick de Vries being the highest Alpha Tauri driver, with a Felipe Drugovich who was stepping in for, of course, the injured Lance Stroll. And unfortunately, at the beginning of the day, he did have a reliability issue, but they did manage to actually get Felipe out pretty quickly, so luckily it wasn't a terminal issue or anything like that. And then we have, of course, the two best friends, Yuki Tsunoda and Pierre Gasly, right next to each other. You just can't separate these two guys. The final names on the timesheet as well are Esteban Ocon in the other Alpine, and then also Oscar Piastri and Kevin Magnussen. And again, Oscar Piastri, I don't think he had the best of morning sessions, to be honest. He spent a lot of time in the garage, but yeah, that completes the lap times at the end of day 1. So now let's get into the big highlights at the end of day 1, and I mean, we've got to start at Aston Martin. It was certainly a bit of a up and down day for them, because right at the beginning of the session, literally within, I think, the first half an hour, unfortunately, Felipe Drugovich, who obviously was the first driver in 2023 to test out the Aston Martin, because originally it was going to be Lance Stroll, he didn't have a great morning, as unfortunately he had to stop fairly early on with an electrical issue, which was pretty frustrating. But what was really good is that, to be honest, Aston Martin weren't really kind of left in the garage for that long, so clearly it was a quick fix, which is good to see, because, you know, although you don't want to see a driver like obviously Lance Stroll on the sidelines and be injured, it is quite good to see the Formula 2 champion of last year getting some seat time in Formula 1, and he did a very respectable job, there's no doubt about it. So in the end, Felipe did manage to get quite a decent amount of laps, 40, considering that he did spend, a little bit with the problem. And now, unfortunately, the issues did continue for Aston Martin. Nothing too crazy in terms of reliability, but apparently during a practice pit stop, the mechanics also broke the floor on Fernando Alonso's car in the afternoon session. So, yes, Aston Martin did have a few kind of hiccups and road bumps there and there, but other than that, to be honest, their car, and again, it's difficult to kind of gauge what the performance is on day one, but because it is only 3 days of testing, the teams don't have time to mess about and sandbag too much, and overall, the Aston Martin does look good. I mean, it's, you know, Fernando Alonso setting the second quickest time of the day, and watching that car go round, I mean, he was really able to push it. He looked really in control. He wasn't kind of ragging it all over the place. So Aston Martin, certainly at the end of day one, I think are going to be very, very happy. And it's not just the fact that he ended up P2 on the timesheets, but he also then set another lap a few laps later that was only 2/10 slower. So to be able to do a time, and that would have been quicker, by the way, than the Ferraris in third. So to set 2 laps kind of back to back that are kind of very, very similar shows that at the very least he's not kind of struggling to get that lap time out of the car. So I'm sure there's going to be plenty of stuff that they're going to work on, but I do think that in terms of at the end of this first day, I think Aston Martin and Red Bull have to be the two teams that are going to leave happiest. I mean, let's talk about Red Bull. Let's talk about the defending drivers and constructors champions. And I mean, what can you say? I think, again, even despite how difficult it is to gauge performance, at the very least, I think Red Bull have already shown that they're going to be race winners at the very least. I mean, they've got the quickest time. They've got the most amount of laps with Max Verstappen. And watching all of the tests for myself, right from the morning session, right from the very first runs, Max Verstappen was always at the top of the timesheets, which, again, even with all of the usual caveats in testing, it shows that when he needed to, he was able to push straight away. He was able to do decent times relative to the other cars around him, and also relative to the tyres that he was on, and he found it pretty easy to find the performance. So yeah, a fantastic start for Red Bull, and I mean, Red Bull definitely can't ask for a better day than that. In terms of some of the really big talking points, Ferrari definitely caught some of the headlines with what appeared to be a dimple in their nose at speed. Now, Ferrari have confirmed that this was not intentional by any means, and I'm pretty sure it's illegal to have kind of movable bodywork and certainly flexible bodywork like that, but basically due to the massive amounts of weight saving that all of the teams are trying to do, that was one of the areas where Ferrari made their nose very, very kind of thin and not very rigid or strong. So under speed, under massive load, there's basically a dimple in the bodywork underneath, and basically the nose kind of compresses inwards inside itself, and then when the car slows down, when there isn't as much load on that nose, it basically just popped back out and looked like it was normal. So yeah, that definitely got a few kind of eyebrows raised, but yeah, Ferrari confirmed this was totally unintentional, and they did actually strengthen the nose of their car in the afternoon. So yeah, we won't be seeing more of that, but either way, still interesting to see, you know, during testing when all of the teams are pushing their packages, all of the teams are testing out kind of the limits of their car, both in terms of the performance and also in terms of the build quality, you know, what they've done to kind of assemble their cars. So yeah, just one of those really interesting key points from a testing session. It must be said, a team that I think will definitely leave disappointed at the end of day one is McLaren. Now, in the morning session, there was quite a few problems for Oscar Piastri. He didn't do, you know, barely any mileage, really. I mean, other than Felipe Drugovich, who actually had a problem and had to stop on the track, Oscar Piastri only managed 52 laps, which is actually, I think, the lowest out of any of the other runners apart from Felipe Drugovich. So yeah, that is not really great. And at the end of the day, McLaren ended with the least amount of mileage. And even when Lando, right at the end of the day, did look like he was on the C3 tire and clearly was trying to push and go for at least a semi-decent lap, the car looked a lot more ragged and on the edge, and certainly nowhere near as composed as the Aston Martin. And yeah, it will be a little bit frustrating because they also had some brake problems with Lando, so that also meant that he was in the garage for quite a long time. And in the end, Lando Norris only did 40 laps, and in the morning, Oscar Piastri only managed 52 for a combined of 92. So yeah, definitely McLaren starting on the back foot, and it's definitely something that you don't want to see because we know the potential of this team. We know how, you know, we know the potential and the quality of Lando Norris. We want to see him be given a good enough car, and certainly off last year that they also had, let's remember, brake issues during the Bahrain test in 2022. It's not something that you want to see happening again in 2023. So again, very early days, but you know, you can put all of the caveats that you want, but a third of the testing time is now gone. So yeah, McLaren certainly are going to be playing catch up. I think more so in terms of mileage to get that reliability absolutely sorted. But yeah, not too much mileage for a rookie Oscar Piastri, which I think to me is the biggest problem because, you know, Lando, I think he's going to get into that car and just feel like home. So he'll be able to get the most out of it. But for a rookie like Oscar Piastri, that is the last thing that you need, you know, these issues, and with such limited track time that he's going to have before, you know, he's going to be thrown into qualifying just next week. So yeah, certainly I think McLaren are going to be the #1 team, along with Haas as well, who certainly had loads of little issues when their cars were on the track. A little bit of bodywork came off Nico Hülkenberg's car, and just in general when both Nico and also K-Mag were out on the track, loads of lockups from the Haas, which again is okay on day 1 where they're kind of really refining their brake setups and everything. But if we see that continuing in day 2 and day 3, then yeah, I think Haas are going to be a little bit worried. So in terms of the teams that I think are going to leave day 1 happiest, I think it's going to be Red Bull and Aston Martin. And in terms of the teams that I think perhaps are going to want to catch up a little bit more in terms of pace and also mileage, more importantly, I think that's going to be Haas and also McLaren. That is my roundup at the end of day 1. Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments box below. And if you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. That would be massively appreciated. And I'll see you in the next one.